the cloud. Hey everybody, welcome to another Oceanside chat via the Viterbi Startup Garage. I am Arcelia. I manage programs and operations for the Garage. It's an incubator program for the Viterbi School of Engineering. Also on this call is Dave Eastman, our director, so we're really happy to have him here too. But what we're really here to do is to welcome our speaker of the day, which is Joe Benjamin. He hails from a few different places. He's currently the founder of Profs company, which is a marketplace that connects startups with fractional sales talent and services. But he has over a decade of sales experience at early stage startups. And so he's perfect for our group of startups at the Garage and hopefully for the rest of the people on this call. He also has experience in SaaS, marketplace, and professional services. So I'm really hoping that, we all gain something from this. I'm positive that no matter what you say, Joe, it's going to be useful for our team. So without further ado, please introduce yourself at length. Thank you for being with us. And I'll pass you the mic now.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So today we're going to go through intro to sales for startup founders, specifically for people who don't have a sales background. And I'm going to kind of just jump into it. If at any point during the presentation today you have a question, feel free to hop in and I'll answer it. And then we'll see how things go from a timing perspective, but always happy to answer questions on the fly. So just a little bit of background on me. I have over a decade of early stage startup sales experience. What that means is I've been the first sales hire 3 times. I've never worked at the really large companies. I've only worked at the early stage startups that are just figuring out how to get product market fit. I've been the first sales leader, head of sales at a couple companies. I have experience in SaaS, marketplace, and professional services. I recently sold a company called Cheetah IQ, which I bootstrapped and sold in a year. And now I'm currently the founder of Profs.co. So what is sales? Really, the way you want to think about sales is you're going to find a problem, find a pain, and then solve a problem. One of the things that I've learned working with a lot of different startup founders is they have a bad impression of sales, and a better way to approach it is to think of it more of a consultant. So you want to go in and you want to help understand what the client's problems are, and then ideally your solution aligns with those problems, and then you're able to solve it. So you're not going to be able to use any type of psychological tricks or hacks. You're not going to be able to, especially if you're in the B2B space, trick people into buying. What you really have to do is figure out what the problems they have are. Sometimes they don't know, and help them understand why it's a problem, and then ultimately align your solution ideally to solving their problem. But really, this is not about being like that stereotypical used car salesman. You actually don't even have to be extroverted or a smooth talker. You just have to know how to solve some problems. So founders must sell. I talk to a lot of startup founders, probably a dozen or so a week, and about half of them are looking to just outsource the sales function for their early stage company, and you cannot do that. That's how you set yourself up for failure. So just know if you're a technical founder and you don't want to do sales and you think you're going to go put a job posting on LinkedIn and hire someone, you can basically kill your company. The reason why really is you're going to learn too much. Learn too much about your customers, going to learn too much about the market. You're going to get a ton of product feedback. So if you're a technical founder or you're building a product, talking to customers is so important. You've probably heard this before, but the more you talk to customers, the easier things get from a product standpoint, the easier things get from a marketing standpoint, and the easier things will get from a sales standpoint. It all plays into each other. You're also going to learn who your customer is. One of the things that's interesting is sometimes you built a really good product, but for the wrong market. So you can shift the market you're going after, and then suddenly opportunity will unlock. You'll also learn who is not your customer. So early on, you may have done some customer research. You may have some false positives, and you'll quickly learn from the market who is and who is not your customer. But I cannot emphasize this enough. As a founder, you cannot outsource being the first salesperson. The question I would ask is, who is the first salesperson at a startup? And it's one of the founders. And really, it's all about learning and getting a ton of feedback from the market. Now, if you needed sales help, you could always get sales coaching. There's some stuff from an activity perspective. Like if you needed someone to help you write some emails, you could definitely get someone to do that. But for the most part, you have to be crafting the messages. You have to be figuring out what resonates. You have to be analyzing the data. You cannot outsource this in the beginning. But don't worry, sales is not hard. It's actually pretty easy. And more importantly, you don't have to get up to an expert level. You just have to get up to a 101 level, and then you can sell your product. If you are actually solving a problem for a company that's a priority to solve, you don't need to be really good at sales. You just need to be good enough. You have to have a foundation in place, but in no way do you need to be an expert. However, you do need to be an expert about the space that you're in. So you want to be able to educate clients about the industry, about trends, whatever it is. And the reason for that is most of your competition is not going to do that. And also you'll be able to position yourself as an expert. You'll come off way more trustworthy and a lot more credible. And so this is a basic outline of how sales works. You have a list of prospects. So these are people that you want to target. Ideally, you've done some customer research. So, you know, we want to go after VPs of marketing at mid-market companies that sell e-commerce solutions. Then you contact those prospects. That could be through cold email, cold calling, LinkedIn messaging, social, whatever. Then you book a meeting. After you book a meeting, you're going to open up your sales cycle where you'll have your intro and discovery call. Then you'll have the sales cycle progress. If it moves forward, it goes to a demo. And then ideally, in a perfect world, you sign that customer and then it repeats. So this is the basic outline of sales, of kind of how it works. It's not a complicated process, but this is very basic depending on the size of company and how many people are involved in the decision-making process of your solution when they're buying it. The steps where you open up a sales cycle and where the sales cycle progresses could be numerous. And then it obviously depends on the number of companies. Any questions so far?
I actually do have a question, just based off of this kind of very clear cycle. What is the range of time from beginning to end in general? When do you know that you're doing it right? How long does it take to get from prospects to signing typically?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it depends on the market that you're going after. If you're going after enterprise companies, for instance, so the big companies with thousands of employees, that could be months. It's not unheard of for like a 6 to 12 month sales cycle. And we'll talk about that in a couple slides. If this is a one call close where maybe you're selling some sort of solution that's $100 a month to a local business, that could be one phone call. So it really just depends on the size of the company. It also depends on how many people are involved in the decision. If you're selling to one department at a company, so maybe you're just selling to the marketing department, that could be 2 weeks to 3 months, depending on what's involved in the buying process on their end. And then there are some companies that move more quickly. So it just depends on who you're targeting.
And then just one more question, based off of this cycle, how many people are involved in kind of getting from point A to point B?
It really depends on, again, the size of the company and then what your solution's targeting. So if it's a solution that the whole company would need to access and be involved and you're not sure who has budget, it could be literally dozens of people who are involved in the buying process. And that's going to be a really bad approach for an early stage startup because it's just going to take too long, and enterprise sales cycles are very difficult, even for good experienced salespeople. But if it's like an SMB or a mid-market company, it could be 1 or 2 people. Ideally, you target someone who's very senior at the company, someone in the C-suite, and they move things along a lot more quickly.
So for the earlier stages, would it be kind of typical for a founder to be responsible for a vast majority of that cycle before they can afford somebody to handle that for them?
Yeah. So if you don't have a repeatable sales process in place, you can't hire anyone. So the founder still has to sell. So until you have a certain number of, there's no kind of hard and fast rule. Some people say it's like 1 million ARR. Some people say it's a couple dozen SMB customers. Some people will say if it's a true enterprise solution, it could be a couple enterprise customers. But until you have a repeatable process that you can document and hand off to someone, the founder still has to do all the sales.
And then there's just one quick question in the chat. Is the sales process the same for software and hardware?
So pretty much, yeah. I think it just depends on kind of the complexities of the buyers. So for something like hardware, there might be different departments, different requirements that are involved, but usually it's more related to this slide, which is the SMB mid-market enterprise slide here. Enterprise is going to have a lot of different buyers if it's a solution that is used across departments. And that could be just like, regardless if it's software or hardware, that's going to be a crazy pain in the ass for founders to sell into. So if you can sell to mid-market or SMB to get started, even if it's hardware, even if it's software, it's going to make your life a lot easier.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions in the chat?
There's one, it will be shared afterwards. You guys will get a wrap-up email, but it doesn't seem like there are any more in the chat so far. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask live before Nick, before Joe continues? You're good to go, Joe.
Okay, cool. So related to sales cycle length, ideally you want to have your feedback loop as a founder selling as short as possible. That goes back to the previous slide where I talked about how much you learn from the market. And if you can focus on either the SMB or mid-market companies, those are going to just save you a lot of headache. The reason for that is they're going to get feedback much more quickly. They're easier to break into. So you can have a lot more meetings with companies 1 to 99 employees versus going after the Nikes of the world. You should not be targeting companies that are extremely large unless you have a solution that's specifically built for enterprise companies. And this just goes back to how long it can take to get feedback, how complicated the buying process can be. Legal alone is going to be a headache. So you really want to focus on SMB and mid-market unless you've specifically built an enterprise solution. So if you don't know if you've built an enterprise solution, you probably haven't. And if you have built an enterprise solution, you'll definitely know. But try to avoid the largest brands with the sexiest logos to start because you want that quick feedback loop and it's just easier. So this is a good slide to screenshot and it's probably the only thing that's pseudo homework for today. You really need to know the answers to all these questions because it's going to help you with all your marketing materials. It's going to help you with your pitch. It's going to help you when you talk to customers. And it's also going to help you kind of evaluate if you're on the right track. So first off, what problem do you solve? If you don't solve a problem and you have what's considered like a vitamin versus a painkiller, you're going to be facing an uphill battle where you run into businesses that are just going to see you as a nice to have. So first you need to solve a problem, but then you also need to solve a problem that's a priority for people to solve. So a lot of companies have problems, but there's only a handful at a time that they're really interested in solving. Next, who has this problem? So if you're selling, and we'll go back to that marketing group example, a solution that helps with some sort of marketing automation. Different people that you reach out to in the marketing department are going to be affected by this problem in different ways. The person who's on the front lines might care how easy it is to use your product, whereas the VP of marketing might only care about cost, or they might only care about lead attribution, whatever it is. But you have to keep that in mind. And then maybe the person who's the middle manager who has an influence on it wants to make sure that your product has specific integrations because their team can't be jumping through different apps and through different windows when they use this product. So you have to keep that in mind. Who has this problem? And then what do they care about related to this problem? The next thing is, how does this problem impact them? If the decision makers aren't impacted by the problem, it's going to be a little bit harder to sell, but maybe you have a champion and explain why this problem is impacting the people below them. And then again, you have to remember, like everyone's at a different level. They have different responsibilities. They care about different things. How are they being impacted by this problem? And then this is a really tough question for a lot of startups to answer. What happens if this goes unsolved? So if they don't lose any money, if they don't save any more time, if their life's not easier and this problem goes unsolved, then you're kind of in a hard place. So you know you're not going after a problem that matters. But if this goes unsolved and they continue to lose money, maybe they're spending way too much time on it, maybe it's just stressful and they can't hire people or whatever it is. But if there's major negatives from this not going solved, then you know you're onto something. The other thing that you have to be aware of is, how is this currently being solved? What do the current solutions miss? So it's very likely they're looking for a solution if this is a priority problem. And then the other thing they have to remember is they might already have a solution in place to try to solve this problem. And so this will help you come to the table ready to handle objections, but also know how you position your product differently, which leads into the next thing is, why is your product now relevant? The most obvious kind of example for something like this would be any of the remote work tools. Right when COVID started, obviously there's a huge market change with all the companies moving to remote. Now the product's relevant. And then how does your new solution work? Also useful to know. And then what's gained by using your solution versus the alternatives. So that's another thing that you have to be aware about. If you can confidently answer all these questions and you're actually solving a problem that's a priority, your life's going to be a lot easier as you go out and try to sell your product. So you have a good understanding of kind of, you need to do sales, where you should be targeting. Now you have to get meetings. So you actually have to get in front of potential customers. So first off, you should have done customer research. If you haven't done customer research, you probably should. There's a really good book called The Mom Test. It will help you figure out what problems you're solving for people and how to avoid false positives. You can read it in probably an afternoon or over the weekend. Definitely buy it if you haven't. You could probably find the PDF online if you Google for it. So you want to contact the people that are your prospects. And the way you do that is you make a tier 1 prospect list and a tier 2 prospect list. Tier 1 prospects are people who you believe, based on your customer research, are a perfect fit for your product. Tier 2 prospects are people who are just kind of good enough. Spend time making your tier 1 prospect list. Again, don't outsource this to someone overseas, and then make the list of people. Use LinkedIn. There's tons of tools that you can use to get contact info from people, and then personalize your outreach to those people. And I'll teach you in another slide on how to write cold emails. But again, if you don't have to go after enterprise companies, avoid them. Avoid the Nikes, the Apples, the Microsofts of the world. Go after the smaller, mid-sized companies that still have plenty of money. Go after startups that have raised VC funds. Those are the better targets for you as a founder who has to do sales. And then below, you have different options, and we'll go into most of these in the next few slides. Cold email, cold calling. LinkedIn works really well. Twitter can work really well. You probably have a network. You probably have some people you can ask for referrals. And then there's all different types of communities. Any questions so far?
I have another question. I have so many questions. So you mentioned, you want to talk to the people whose problem you're solving. However, those people aren't always the decision makers in their companies. And so I often hear founders, kind of hitting that wall where it's like, they're not really talking to the right people. What kind of advice could you give to startup founders who are in that kind of issue on how they can elevate the conversation? What can they say or do? Is there anything they can do to kind of get it, elevated in the customer side to the people who would be ready to pull the trigger?
Yeah, so this goes back to targeting the right companies. So first off, maybe you're in the wrong market. Maybe you're going after companies with too many layers of management and they're too large, and there's a path of least resistance that you can, or a path that's easier for you with less resistance that you can go after. So that's the first thing that you can think of, should we just try different companies? There's literally hundreds of thousands of prospects for most B2B products. So that's the first thing you want to think of. If these are the types of companies I have to target and you're getting blocked from going too senior, there's something that you're doing that's not compelling. Either you're not solving a problem that's important enough, or when you talk to the people, maybe during your discovery call, you're not asking to loop them into the conversation. So often what I see is you have your first call where you run your discovery and you see okay, these people have this problem. We have a solution for it. And then you have a demo, but you're not actually asking them to bring people in who are more senior to the demo. So that's one thing. Another thing is maybe you don't have material that's worth passing internally, or you haven't made a compelling enough case for why people who are more senior should be joining the call. The other thing is sometimes they're just not targeting people who are senior enough in an effective way. They send one email and then that's it. I recently closed a deal. I went after the CEO's company's worth 80 million. It's a good sized company, but it's not like a monster enterprise company. And before that, I was reaching out to companies around that size, but I was going to VPs of marketing and CMOs, and I was getting shot down. I went directly to the CEO, closed a deal over email. CEOs are the easiest people to actually close deals with. And so for me, it was just about, instead of going after the VPs of marketing, I went after the CEO at another company, and it was the easiest sales cycle I've had. I mean, it was literally just 20 emails back and forth. So sometimes just go even higher. If you think you need to go after the VP of marketing, go to the CEO, see if you can get to the CEO.
Great, thank you. There was also a question in the chat for enterprise solutions where you need to sell to 1,000+ people, companies. I just lost it. What are some tactics for seeming bigger than you really are? That's a pretty typical startup scenario.
Yeah, so this goes back to having a lot of credibility, expertise, and solving a problem that's a priority for them to solve. Because companies, and I've sold from early stage startups to large enterprise companies, if you have a solution to a problem that they really care about, that's painful for them, they'll work with you. You can't fake it and say you can't make yourself look bigger. They're going to go on LinkedIn and they're going to look you up. I can almost guarantee that. You just have to make sure you're compelling, that you're an expert, and that they should trust you. You can run pilots. So we'll talk about that later. Maybe there's a way for them to de-risk it. So you run a pilot to see if there's a way for it to work for them, they can test you out for a couple months, and then that's how you get in. But as far as kind of like making yourself seem bigger, it's probably the wrong approach, just because buyers are too sophisticated and they do their homework.
Great, thank you. Anyone
no
else
problem.
have more questions before Joe moves on?
Nope. Okay. So cold email, it's by far the easiest and most cost-effective way to book meetings. You should all learn how to write a good cold email. There's not a lot of, there's no real trick to it. It's just effort, and it can be time consuming. I talked to a CEO on Monday who's got a fintech startup. Him and his team spend 30% of their day writing cold outreach, and they're booking meetings with Fortune 500 C-suites. And it's all just because it's personalized messages. There's no hack here. It's just effort. So here are some best practices that you can use to ensure you're in a better position to write good cold emails. First, subject line, 3 words or less. You want to avoid kind of the marketing lingo. The second thing that you want to think about is don't talk about yourself or your startup. A lot of people will say how great they are and what their startup's doing and how they're disrupting so-and-so industry. Nobody cares, and there's a lot of garbage emails like that. The other thing that you want to think about is personalize that first sentence for your tier 1 prospects. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. First is when you get an email on your phone, you're going to see that preview line, or if you open up Gmail, you see like a few words before you open that email. So if it's a generic kind of salesy email, it's going to get deleted, or they're not going to open it. The second thing is that you want to personalize it so it feels one-to-one, and that's going to help them to read the next line. So you got to think, first, I got to get them to be okay with the subject line. Then I got to get them to be okay with that first sentence or preview, and then I can get into the rest of my email. The other thing when you're doing cold outreach, balance quality with quantity. It can be really time consuming to write cold emails, and the best cold email writers are not going to return like 40, 50% reply rates. The best that I see like over a large industry, you're probably going to be, if you're doing well, like 5 to 10%. So expect most of them to just get no response. Some people will be really rude. Don't worry about that. But really balance that quality with quantity. And then the other thing that you want to think about is touch on one pain per email. Often your solution can solve for various pains, and you think in your head like, well, I need to cover all my bases. Don't do that. You can't mention everything in one email. It comes too long. One pain per email. You can reply to those emails. So maybe on the next email, you touch on a different pain. Other things that you want to think about, create curiosity. You don't need to explain everything about your product. You don't even need to talk about your product. You could say something like, startups are using a new method to solve X. You can lead with an insight. So I've had a lot of, I would say, success leading with an insight. So it's something I know, and this goes back to that credibility and expertise slide that I mentioned earlier. If you know something about the industry, if there's some data that you've uncovered or there's a report that you read, lead with that, because then you'll teach them something. And you can also create an insecurity. There's multiple ways to do this. You could mention other companies are doing something. If you have companies that are working with you and have solved a problem and they're in a similar space, you can mention those people. The key for cold outreach is following up. Don't worry about bothering people. It doesn't matter. You have to book meetings, follow up. If you have clients and you have case studies, you need to use what's called apples to apples social proof. So if you close Nike, and I know before I said don't go after Nike, but say you close Nike and now you're targeting small businesses or mid-market companies and you say Nike uses our product, they're going to think it's too expensive and it's too much product for their needs. So make sure it's apples to apples. Mid-market companies get mid-market social proof. SMB companies get SMB social proof. You can run sequences. So this is multiple emails over 2 or 3 weeks. You can also, and this is something that you can steal, which has worked really well for me. You lead with an insight about a topic. So I had a sales research tool. My first email was to VPs of sales at large companies. And I would tell them how valuable 10Ks in earnings calls were for sales research. And then that was it. There was no call to action. I didn't ask for time. And then 2 days later, I would follow up and offer a free training with no charge, no catch. I mentioned some of the other companies that I worked with, and I offered the training to their team. And I ended up getting a lot of replies because first I made them insecure and I led with an insight because their teams weren't using 10Ks in earnings calls for sales research. And then I brought value with no expectation on my end. And about half the time it led to a proposal after we gave them, because companies aren't stupid. They know if you're going in there and you're teaching their team something, there's something in it for you. You're just not a charity worker at a startup. So that's a really good tactic if you're kind of on the fence about cold email, or you're going after companies where it's really challenging to break in. And then a couple other things, right? For mobile, it's like 50 to 60% of emails are opened up on mobile, but it's a good framework to use because then you don't write too much. You want to be able to open the email on your phone and I'll read it without having to scroll, write like you speak, throw out all that horrible business jargon. Don't write hope all is well. You never say hope all is well to someone in person. And you also just like, it's fluff. And it goes back to that preview line where people will see hope all is well. They don't recognize your email. They know it's a sales email. And then there's some data right now, this could change, that says instead of saying like, how is 3 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, you could say interested in learning more, worth exploring, stuff like that for having a soft call to action. And remember, for cold email, you're not selling your solution at all. Your goal is to book a meeting. So you're just trying to move people to the next step. That's it. So you don't have to overdo it. Create some insecurity, lead with an insight, personalize it, and then follow some best practices. Any questions on cold email? Because this is always a heavy slide with a ton of information.
I have a question on this, and maybe a couple related to this. You said follow-up emails are key, and you said don't worry about bothering them, which is great. But would you mind telling me, let's say I send you an email today, what generally is the time frame that I should send the next follow-up? Is it 2 days later, 5 days later, a week later? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first off, remember, like, people get a lot of emails, so following up's not a big deal. For one reason, like, they're probably not going to even remember you. I couldn't tell you 3 of the vendors that emailed me last week. So just like throw that out, because that tends to be a hurdle for a lot of non-sales founders. As far as the timeline for following up, you want to test everything, but usually I just do 2 days. It tends to be a pretty good way to follow up 2 days later. A lot of times I'll email them Tuesday, and then Thursday, they're going to get a follow-up email from you.
Got it. And then the second follow-up question is, I've done, and maybe this is after the fact, because this is not the, sorry, I may be jumping the gun here, but after they've done the demo with you, right, we put them in an email nurturing sequence. So they get 1 email for 7 times over and things like that. Is that what you would recommend as well? And again, this may be jumping.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I'd have to know more about what you're doing, but if you have a product demo with a potential customer, I wouldn't put them into a marketing automation sequence unless you've considered it a closed lost opportunity and you just want to nurture them. Personally, if I was reviewing vendors and then I would realize this isn't a fit for me, and then you put me in a marketing nurture, I'd probably just unsubscribe. So I would say you have to figure out, how do you not put them into a marketing nurture sequence? Are these people who are qualified opportunities and still live opportunities for you, or are these closed lost?
No, there just has been a lot longer than, I expected to close. So they would be basically heading to the closed lost.
Yeah, this is my personal preference, but I would not want marketing emails coming to me with a vendor that I'm considering. I would want to figure out, how do I tighten up my sales cycle? How do I calendar next steps with them? So I keep them on some sort of timeline, and I have an expectation of when we're talking next, and they have an expectation when we're talking next. But also, full disclosure, it depends on your price point and a lot of other variables. So if it was a really cheap product, maybe it does make sense to put them in a marketing nurture campaign, because you don't want to always be on calls with them.
So you were talking earlier about mobile friendliness, and I'm a former mobile editor, so I think a lot about that. But we are working on possibly incorporating video into our cold email campaign, and I've heard that it's effective. We currently don't have it. We don't have any flashy design, buttons, stuff like that. But because I'm really sensitive to that as a former mobile editor. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on videos and things like buttons to book a meeting and stuff like that.
So for cold outreach, we're just talking sales perspective here. You're a founder, you want to get in front of a prospect and get them on a call. Videos can, first of all, you don't want to overthink what you're doing and optimize it, because most of the time with cold outreach, you're not going to get a response. So you need to balance your time with results. So let's just kind of put that out there. Video can work. So it can absolutely work. And the reason why it works is because it's a little bit of a pattern interrupt where people are so used to getting text emails, they're going to be like, oh, well, who's this video from? Now, here's the kind of issue I have with video early on is that you can get caught by spam filters, especially if you're going after corporate accounts, because it just raises a red flag to them when you're sending them. They can be kind of time consuming to create. I mean, are you making like personal videos where it's, hi, I'm Laura with company X?
No, this is a video that's like exists already. It's already live on YouTube and Vimeo. Like it's just a general kind of like marketing video.
I would test it, but I would not lead with that for my cold outreach.
Okay. When you say don't lead with it, do you mean like don't lead with it literally first thing in the email, or do you mean like only put it in subsequent emails, don't put it in the first cold email?
I wouldn't probably, so this is what I would do. I probably wouldn't send an explainer video because that violates the second point, which is don't talk about yourself or your startup.
Makes sense.
And the reason why is they just don't care yet. They care about their problems. And once you realize like, okay, these people have problems, they want someone to come in. And then when they see that text in their inbox that says like, I solved that problem, they're like, oh, I have this problem. Like I need to talk to this person, then you're good to go. But just like an unsolicited video on your company, I don't think that will be effective. I thought you meant, so people are now sending as prospecting videos, like they use something like Drift or Loom. Well, where they will record like a 30-second, 60-second video. That's the same thing as the cold email. That's personalized, but it's a video. And so people feel it's even more personalized. It's more one-to-one, and that can be effective. And people send that in their cold emails and they use it on LinkedIn as well. So that's what I thought.
Well, so our video is more, it literally starts with like, the narrative is like your editing workflow like has changed with the time, like, or what, like it literally starts with a customer problem. It's not just like, hi, welcome to StyleBot. But anyway, it's interesting that you're talking about those videos because I've seen personally an increase in the solicitations I get with people sending me a photo of themselves, like with like one, I just got
with a coffee
today.
Or something.
Yeah. Or like with my LinkedIn profile in the background.
Yeah.
And like,
it's gimmicky.
Like, yeah, I feel like it's like a trendy thing right now.
Yeah, so there's a tool called Lemlist that does that. It's kind of gimmicky. Like sometimes we'll have like your name on a cup of coffee, and some people have had success with it. I always say like test everything. You just have to kind of think about you probably have a really good script addressing the problems in your video. You might want to put that into a text format and then just A/B test it with a video to see what works. But usually it needs to be more personalized. And it's actually a really good follow-up because people might be like, oh yeah, I'm interested in learning more, but I don't want to take a call right now. Is there any information you can send? So then that's where I would use it.
I'm glad that you mentioned A/B testing. I do feel like oftentimes with sales specifically, people just are throwing a lot of shit at the walls and seeing what sticks and not really paying attention to what's happening, and analyzing that, like that data analytics is missing in sales a lot. We had a question, hand raised, but then he disappeared.
Hi, I'm right here.
Oh, there he goes. Okay, I was gonna segue into you, but then you disappeared. Okay, go for it, Daniel.
Sorry. So, Joe, first of all, thank you for all that info. It's been really helpful. For one specific point that I've been having trouble with was, I'm focusing on selling an in-person networking tool for networking events and professional groups. It's a software. And for me, it's like how to pinpoint that problem. So what are some best practices to be able to pinpoint that problem into one sentence that's could be able to help them recognize that problem that they're having? Because for us, it's very post-COVID problem that coming out of that remote is like an emerging problem. So what are some best practices to be able to get that one-liner done?
Talk to customers and see how they describe it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I would do because usually they can give you the best copy. Have you done customer research where you've talked to like 30? Did you record the calls or take notes?
Yes. So you think I should review those calls and then just kind of look at what they said and then.
That's perfect. Then that's what I would do for my first attempt. And then I would just test everything, see what resonates. You don't want to be, I'm not saying you are, but you don't want to be emotional to like the idea of what could work. Just test everything and then let the data lead you to what converts at the highest rate. You might be surprised.
Okay. And then do you have some best cold email templates that have worked for you in the past that are helpful to look at?
Not on me. I mean, I have cold emails like all in my inbox. So usually
go ahead. Sorry, Joe.
Yeah. So for cold emails, like you don't want to use necessarily a template. Maybe this is just semantics, but there's some sort of structure usually to cold email. It's that first line is going to be personalized, so it's relevant to them with some sort of insight, and then that artfully will segue into the next sentence that either has your value prop or another insight, or you're touching upon a problem, and then you have the option to just go straight into a call to action or mention social proof of some kind, and then that's pretty much it. But there's no like, you'll see like people have SEO'd different like best cold email templates. Every other SaaS company that's struggling has used those and their SDR team is using them. They're not going to be that effective.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, no problem.
I'd say for the sake of time, go ahead and continue on.
Okay. How are we on time?
We're doing good. 109. You're a
Okay.
fast talker, but that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I try to get through it. So cold calling, this one will be short. It works. It can be very time consuming. The challenge with cold email is that everyone sends cold email. There's tools that make it very easy to send hundreds of emails per day. So it's harder to break through. You used to be able to send, like 5 years ago, a generic templated message. Every 100 people, you'd book like 3 to 5 meetings. It was really easy. Now you might book 1 out of 100 if it's generic, maybe 0.5%. So it's tough. Cold calling works better, just time consuming. There's certain industries you must cold call. Cold email will not work. One of them is like if you're attacking SMBs where the owner is your person that you need to talk to. Cold calling works really, really well for that. But it still works really well at larger companies. A lot of executives, if you call them before their secretary or executive assistant comes in, like early in the morning or early in the evening, that can work well. But really, it's just a numbers game. If you want some resources, go to gong.io. It's a conversational intelligence tool. They have all different types of cold calling tips, examples, scripts. That's going to be your best resource, better than whatever I can provide. But really, it's just, you got to make sure you dedicate time to cold calling because it is a numbers game. So LinkedIn, if you sell B2B products to marketing, HR, sales, operations, pretty much anything except like DevOps and IT, and even IT a little bit, it's going to work for you. It's in one of the most cringeworthy places on the internet, but you can make a ton of money using it. And the key to doing that is just becoming an expert or known for something that you help with. So if we'll just talk about, let me pick up a topic. So if you do compliance, right? Like you have a compliance tool for accountants. If you just talk about compliance around accounting 7 days a week, and that's all you post about, and then you add people who are your target market, and that's all you talk about all the time, you will get inbound leads. You'll get people who will message you and be like, hey, I want to learn more about your product, or like, hey, really enjoy your content. It's crazy. So you post. So maybe, 10, 15 posts, then do a giveaway of some kind. So maybe it's a checklist, maybe it's a guide, maybe it's an audit, maybe it's a teaching session like the thing I mentioned before. But you want to just keep posting and then do giveaways. Your profile is no longer going to be a resume, it's a landing page. So make sure that your profile looks kind of like your website in a way that you're going to be kind of funneling people to some sort of call to action, ideally to either message you or to go to your website. Your header image should probably be on brand. You need to have a tagline. Most people don't have a featured section. So if you have that explainer video that Laura mentioned earlier, put that in your featured section. People will watch that and then they're going to message you. And the goal here is just post, build awareness. They're going to go to your profile because you're going to be like, who is this person? Some people will message you. Some people will add you. Some people will go to your website. If you do 15 minutes per day on LinkedIn, and then you engage with people who are also popular and have large followings in your space, you will get business. I can pretty much guarantee it. The issue is, and this is something that I have also struggled with, is consistency. It is hard to get up every day and go on LinkedIn and post and engage. But if you do 15 minutes per day, guarantee you it will work. Another thing is you probably have some sort of network. You need to put aside being shy and ask for introductions. So after you've made that tier 1 list, look to see if you have any friends, family, people you went to school with who work at those companies, and ask for introductions to those people. You will be shocked by the people who help you and be shocked by the people who won't do anything for you. It's really random. So that's why you have to ask everyone. If you have happy customers, ask for referrals. When I do consulting for larger companies, they don't ask for referrals either. It's the easiest way to get more business. You just have to ask. But if you don't ask, you don't get. Another thing that you can do, but this is time consuming, so I like to put an asterisk next to it. Join the relevant communities that your audience is in. There's Discord groups, there's Slack groups, there's like Twitter chats, whatever it is. Join those. There's Facebook groups too. You can get a lot of business from them, but you just have to add value and play the long game. You can't do everything. So if you find a channel that's working really well for you, double down on it. So let's jump into the simplified sales process. I know we're kind of like running a little bit behind, I think. So really, this is a simplified sales process. This is super, super basic, just to kind of outline how things go. So you've sent your cold email, you've booked a meeting, you're at meeting number 1. This is what I call your intro call, where you're going to do discovery. You're going to uncover the pains and problems that the prospect has. You're going to qualify them. So it's a mutual qualification. Not everyone's going to be a fit for your product, and they might not be a fit for you. If that goes well, it's clear that you're solving a problem that they want to solve. The next call is you would do your product demo. On that demo, you're just going to connect the product features that are relevant to your discussion on call 1. You don't dump all the features on them. You don't show them everything. You just show what's relevant. Then the next call, and this is again very simplified because most are not like this, you have a proposal call. So you discuss whatever the deliverables are, pricing, legal. Do it all over the phone. We'll talk about this in a second. But you don't want to just like send off a proposal unless you have like a very cheap SaaS and you're running, like a $29 a month SaaS or something. And then if you need to understand how to run a good demo, firstround.com, your product demo sucks. Just Google this. It's really good. It's a really good article for founders. So that intro call where you're running discovery, this is the basic structure. You do some introduction, some rapport building, research them before the call, look them up on LinkedIn, see if you have anything in common with them. Then when you start the call, you want to add structure to it. So you're in control. People want to be led. They have meetings all day. They have lots of things to do. Take control. Don't just like let it kind of exist on a Zoom meeting. Explain what you'll be discussing. And then you can tell them that at the end of the call, you'll leave time to discuss next steps. A great first question to ask a prospect. And this is what I always ask for when I do cold outreach and I book a meeting. I say, and you can steal this, just out of curiosity, you get a ton of requests for meetings like these. What prompted you to take today's call? And the reason why this is really effective, especially for founders, is they're going to tell you exactly why they took the call. Some people might say, oh, like we're looking for a solution like you have based on what we saw on your website. Or they might say like, oh, we're just curious. We're window shopping. And then you kind of know where things stand in the call. Laura, I think I saw you had a question.
Yeah, so I've been trying to improve my sales prowess by just asking, doing this piece of it, asking more questions, just being more curious, understanding. I am someone who experienced the problem and then like solving my own problem in my industry. So I feel like, I think I intuitively understand it. So I feel like I'm not spending enough time on this and I'm trying to improve that. But what I have discovered recently, like this happened yesterday with like a big potential prospect, was people are just like, they've heard about the product at this point and they're just like chomping at the bit to see it. And I feel like I am like, it gets to the point where it's like awkward if I just keep asking them questions. Like I feel like I'm starting to trick them, or it feels off for me to just try to keep asking questions rather than just being like, okay, let me show you, is that making sense?
Yeah. So I think you have to be very cognizant of the buyer's experience. And if they know about your product already and they've maybe even come inbound to you and they want to see the product, you should show them the product. You want to align their expectations to your process. Now, you need to make sure you also get enough information so you can show them what's relevant in your product, because they don't always know. So what you say for something like that is, and I assume, are you scheduling 30 minutes for the call?
I'm actually only scheduling like 15 minutes.
Okay,
Sometimes they go over, but they're 15 minutes scheduled.
So start scheduling 30 minutes.
Okay.
That's the first thing I would do. And then you can say like the first 15 minutes, I just want to kind of understand things so I can align the product demo to exactly what your needs are. And then that's when they'll completely understand. And then you're like, I'm going to show you the product. Don't worry. I hate when salespeople make me have multiple calls. Then you can use the last 15 minutes to show them exactly what you need to show them. This assumes that you can show them enough in that 15 minutes. But you'll have to play it by ear and decide, like, do I need to schedule another call with them to dig a little bit deeper? But I always believe, and this is also from being on the buyer side, I don't want to be dragged through a process by a salesperson if I know I want to see the product.
Right.
But you do need to talk to them enough, understand, like, what's their buying process like? Why do they need this product? What else have they been looking at? How does this product compare to the other options? Where are they in their own buying process? Is this like something that they're buying this week? Do they have budget aligned for it? So there's some value for you. And if you just show people the product, they're going to make assumptions about it. They want to also know, like, you're credible too. So if you ask really good questions, like, just out of curiosity, you get a ton of requests for meetings like these. What prompted you to take today's call? That might help you immediately jump to what you need to show them in the demo. But
I wish that we had done this a little bit more than 24 hours earlier, because I wish I would have asked that yesterday on a call. I'm totally stealing it.
Go for it. You'll be fine. The market's huge. But yeah, do 30 minutes. Most people, I never schedule 15 minutes for a call.
Okay.
Ever. It's not enough time for anyone. Okay.
Thanks.
Was that helpful?
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you.
No problem.
So really quick, another question in the chat from Rebecca. She's asking if there's a fast track for lead generation. The question is, are there any lead generation platforms or recommendations or anything you've heard about, especially using AI to generate targeted lead lists?
Yeah, there's plenty of tools that you can use. It really just depends on your budget. There's tools like Apollo that are pretty good. I can send a link to that if anyone wants. But I don't know from an AI standpoint. A lot of being good at early stage sales is making sure you know exactly who you want to target. So I wouldn't outsource it to a tool necessarily, but if you need to get the contact information after you figured out who you want to target, then that's fine. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is really good for building lead lists. So there's lots of tools like UpLead, Lead 411. ZoomInfo is going to be too expensive for early stage founders. Lead IQ is another one. So there's tons of tools to get the contact information, but you need to know exactly who you want to target.
Well, thank you.
No problem. So just to jump back into this, good discovery. So that's what you're doing on the first call. It's going to be conversational, not an interrogation. You want to think of, like, if you met a friend at a bar to talk about them and you haven't seen them in a while, you want to dig in the topics that they talk about. You don't want to just, like, jump around to different topics. You really have to see how painful the problem is for them, and they should be talking more than you. So if you're talking more than they are, it's not going well. The rule of thumb is like 50 to 60% of the time should be spent by them speaking, not by you. And then this is one of the most common mistakes that founders who haven't done sales make at the end of the call. So be cognizant of how much time you have at the end of the call and make sure they're all at least 30 minutes. Schedule next steps with them. Don't get off the call without scheduling next steps. Otherwise, they're going to ghost you and you're going to spend time chasing them down. You can say, like, look, we have, a couple more minutes left. I think a demo would make a lot of sense based on our discussion today. How do you feel about that? They'll say, yeah, sure, exactly. Like, that's what I was thinking too. Then you say, do you have your calendar in front of you? Everyone's at their computer. Of course, they have their calendar in front of them. Pick a time, ideally as soon as possible. Like, that's just going to be better for you. It's going to shorten your sales cycles. So maybe like 2 days later, ask them if they have time in the afternoon. Afternoon meetings convert at a much higher rate than morning meetings for a variety of reasons. And then just get a calendar and send them the calendar invite either like while they're on the call or right after. And then that's going to make your sales cycles much tighter and you won't be chasing people. Demo. So you've done your intro call. Now you're on a demo call for 30 minutes. First thing you do, you recap the last call. You can ask, has anything changed since we last spoke? You would be surprised how many times things have changed. Often nothing's changed, but sometimes they're like, oh yeah, this has become a priority. Or yeah, we talked about this internally, like we need to bring all these other people in because they're really interested too. You want to also show the parts of your product that are relevant to your prospects' pain points. So if your product does 10 different things, only like 3 or 4 might be relevant. Then it feels like your product's built to solve their problem. Don't feature dump. A lot of technical founders like to talk about how the sausage is made and all the different bells and whistles they've created. Don't do that. Don't do what I've been doing today, which is going on a long monologue. People tune out unless they're like really, really interested. And most people in the corporate world will not be. Don't ask, does this make sense? If you ask people, does this make sense? They're going to say yes 95% of the time. Nobody wants to look like they don't understand something on a call. So you want to ask them like how they would use this, or how do they think this would change what they're currently doing. That's the easiest way to do it. You just want to make them involved, but also not, you don't want to put them on the spot, but ask them like, based on what you saw, like, how do you think this would change the problem today? Or like, based on how doing this, how much time do you think this might save? And then you can say, why do you think that would save you time? Like, don't be afraid to ask questions that might make them look silly or uncomfortable. You need to do that because if they verbalize how this could change their business, how they can go from their current state to their future state, that's going to be a win for you. So proposals, I'll go through this pretty quickly. The simpler your proposal, the better. Keep it short. Prospects who are a pain in the ass about price are going to be a pain in the ass forever. It never gets easier. No one's like going to try to really hammer you home on discounting and then suddenly like they're like a great client. Avoid them. Seriously, I cannot tell you the number of clients I've worked with at early stage startups when I've sold to like the CEO of a company. He's like, I'm going to introduce you to all these people. And then like you're fighting them to pay their invoice. So just keep that in mind. Present proposals on calls. A lot of people are like, great, like they want a proposal. I'm going to send it over to you via email. Nah, get them on a call. If you get them on a call, you're going to get feedback, which is really important at this stage. The other thing is if they have any hesitation, you'll be able to read that either in their voice or kind of like whatever they're saying on the call. And then you can address it there. It makes things a lot more efficient for you. And then really the point is like, you want them to commit. So you can ask them to like, should I send this via DocuSign and will you sign tonight? And then they'll probably say either yes, or they'll give you some more information that you can use to kind of adjust your sales process. Pay attention to payment terms. Companies will try to screw you on payment terms all the time where it's like, I've sold to a company who's like net 90 and net 120, which is absurd. Push back on all of this stuff. Like if you are solving a problem that is a real problem for them and you've built a solution, don't be afraid to push back on these companies. And if they ask you for some sort of concession or discount, go back to them and be like, okay, like, sure, we can discount this by 5%. Are you willing to do a case study for me? And then they'll say yes. So, or you can ask them for an introduction, whatever it is. But if you give something to them, get something back. Like, don't be afraid because you're this no-name startup that you don't have any leeway here. And then the last thing on this is most people do not know how to negotiate. Negotiation is a skill. If you read this book, Never Split the Difference, you'll be better than most of the people that you're dealing with from a proposal negotiation standpoint. It's a good book anyway. You'll save money in your personal life and then also in your business life. And I think I saw someone raise their hand.
Yeah, I had a quick question on this proposal. I'm assuming there's a price point where you're creating proposals, right? Because like our product is a monthly user, about $30. We don't send a proposal. It's, hey, the pricing is what it is, and you either sign up for a trial or not.
Yeah, so this wouldn't be relevant for that. But at an early stage startup, you could do that, or you could bring it up on your demo call at the end to kind of get them to move forward and say, like, this is the price, this is what you get for this package versus this package, and get their feedback.
Sorry. I usually say the pricing on the call. I usually wait for people to ask me the price and then I tell them what it is and I say it. And then I tend to follow up with a written estimate, because then they'll be like, oh, okay, can you send this to me? And I'll say like, yes, I'll send you an estimate. And that's what I do. Is that the wrong thing to do?
So I don't necessarily think it's the wrong thing to do. I think that you should try getting them on another call for a proposal and this is going to contradict what I said earlier, but for some of these proposal calls, they can be 15 minutes because you've already explained pricing to them, but you want to get their feedback as an early stage founder. This kind of stuff may not apply later, but now you're all about getting feedback and collecting information from the market. If you just send the proposal via email and they like don't understand something, they might just not even reply to your email. But if they're on the call with you and they don't understand something, they will ask you and you have a chance to clarify it. But you can absolutely discuss pricing on a demo call. You can discuss it on an intro call. You should discuss it. But I'm just saying from getting that signature and making sure everything's aligned, you want to have people on calls.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. This will be quick. Pricing. One thing I've noticed working with a lot of founders is they underprice their product. Raise your prices. If you're selling to big companies, they have a lot of money. Don't be afraid to charge them. If they ask you to do a pilot, you have to charge them. Don't do free pilots. Free pilots, people don't take seriously. They have to pay you. Just like, and it's also a form of validation. People will of course take your product for free if they're kind of interested, but if they have to pay, that means internally they have to get some sort of approval. They have to get a credit card or a wire, whatever it is. This doesn't apply if you have like a freemium or free trial. Pricing is really tricky. I don't have like good information on pricing for you. I do think that most companies should probably raise their prices. The one thing to always keep in mind is you might get anchored by products in your category. That's kind of been the ceiling for some SaaS products that I've seen and worked with. They just get compared to, so if they're a CRM, they're going to get compared to Salesforce. So that's just something to keep in mind. Sales funnel, I know we're almost at time. I can go over if everyone else wants to. Sales funnel, so sales is math. Once you figure out how many people you have to contact to get a meeting, and then how many people from that meeting go to the demo, and then how many of those people from the demo sign, then you know it's just about more activity at the top and then optimizing the other steps. So it does become a bit of a math equation, but this is why activity at the top of the funnel is so important, because if you're not constantly prospecting and you slow prospecting down, your funnel just shrinks because these deals aren't going to come from the sky. You actually have to put in the work as an early stage company. So this is a pretty important slide. And this is based on my experience working with a lot of technical founders and working with CEOs who don't have sales experience. You're going to get rejected so much when you're prospecting and when you're talking to clients. Just expect it. Expect rejections. You're going to take so many L's, and that's okay. If you want, you can write on a piece of paper like 100 different L's and cross them off every time someone rejects you. You will get some wins before you cross off 100. And that's all you need to know. You just have to keep moving forward. Another thing to remember, nobody cares about you. You're irrelevant. It just doesn't matter. And the sooner you kind of understand that you're just like this irrelevant person in the market, kind of frees you a little bit from like worrying about rejection. And it also frees you from kind of taking your like company and trying to shove it in people's face. You have to put yourself in their shoes and think, why should they care about me? What problems do I solve for them? What pains can I solve for them? How can I make them more money? How can I make their life easier? How can I save them time? So once you kind of shift that mindset, it's going to allow you to get more meetings and close more deals. Another thing, nobody cares about your awards. Nobody cares where you went to school. Again, they only care what you can do for them. That's it. Buyers are extremely self-centered and selfish. And they should be, because they have salespeople contacting them all the time. They have marketing people shoving ads in their face all the time. And then they have people at work bothering them. So you got to think, how do they benefit? What do they gain? Are there losses that you're preventing? How much better will their life be with your product? If you can't answer those questions, you got to go back to the drawing board. Also think, what impact will you have on their business? And can you solve their problems? Do they have problems that are painful that you can solve? And then some other things to keep in mind. Usually your number one competitor as a startup is the status quo. This is the way they've been doing things. This is the tool they've been using for the last 3 years. You have to figure out how you can overcome that. And then from a sales perspective, your number two competitor tends to be noise. Buyers are bombarded by salespeople. So you just need to be persistent, don't give up, but you also have to focus on the right opportunities, which goes into the next bullet point. I've noticed for some reason that people have a meeting with a client that's not a good fit, but they still spend time chasing it. They get frustrated by it. They think about it. Like, get rid of the loser opportunities. Like, if there's a company that doesn't respond to your emails after a couple of weeks, they're not that great of a fit, but they're like a nice logo, or like there's some reason why you want to close them, get rid of them. The market's so big. There's so many companies out there. Don't chase your loser opportunities. And then we're almost done. So some other sales tips. Remember, you want to sell the benefits, not the features. Technical founders, for whatever reason, like to talk about how the sausage is made. Nobody cares. They don't care about the bells and whistles. They want to know how you solve their problem, and they want to know how their life's going to be better. Show them what it can do for them. So a sales concept is people have their current state. This is where they currently are right now. This is their problems. This is how their business is. Their future state is where you're going to take them with your solution. So your solution fills that gap between the current state and the future state. When you think about that, that can help you understand like what the actual benefits are of your product. Sometimes you're going to have to ask for business. One easy way to do that is based on what we've discussed today, is there any reason why you wouldn't move forward with X? If you have that SaaS product that's $29 a month and you're demoing it, you should be asking that, I think, at the end of every call. Worst case scenario is they give you some feedback why they're not moving forward. Best case scenario is they're ready to sign and they just don't know how to sign up yet. Take good notes. I know this might sound silly, but you're going to eventually have a lot of calls. Everything blends together. You're not going to remember anything. Another thing that's a good tip, if you don't have LinkedIn Sales Navigator, you probably should get it for prospecting. 90 days job change is a hot prospect. What that means is people who have changed jobs in the past 90 days, that means they're like at a mid-level to senior position. They're more likely to buy. The data is like 2 to 10 times more likely to buy. So when you build those tier 1 prospect lists, find those people first. And the reason why they're more likely to buy is if you've moved into like the senior VP role for operations or marketing, you're probably doing that if you have some budget. You're not doing that because you just want the title. And also they're brought in to have some sort of change that they're going to be responsible for. Calendar your calls. Don't jump off calls without calendaring next steps. And then if you have a pilot, so say you're talking to a company and they're like, we want to pilot this. First off, it can't be free, because if it's free, they don't take it seriously. But more importantly, you need to have some sort of success criteria. So if your product saves them, a certain amount of hours, or it helps them solve A, B, and C, that's your success criteria that should convert into a signature. You can't just give it to them to let them try. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster. And then here's some other top sales tips. So activity is really important. Record your activity so you know what you're spending time on. The more calls and emails you make, or the more calls you make, the more emails you send, the more intro calls you have, the more intro calls you have, the more demos you have, the more demos you have, the more people will sign up. That's pretty much it in sales. It's not rocket science. So the more activity you put towards sales, the more business you're going to get. Like, can pretty much guarantee that. The other thing is calendar those next steps. I mentioned that before. One thing that you also want to remember, and a lot of people don't kind of, see this, a sales cycle with clients, all it is just a series of small closes. So the first close is to book that meeting with them. Then the next thing is to book that demo call. Then the next thing is to book the proposal call. So you're not actually trying to close someone. There's no trick here to close them. You just want to move them through your process, and every step that you move them to the next with a calendar call is a close. So close them across your sales process, and then things will close. The other thing is provide a great customer experience, be responsive to them, show up on time for your meetings, do your research before so you're prepared for the calls, and be honest. If you're not a fit for them, let them know. You'd be surprised. They might refer you to someone that they know. And then, be persistent and don't give up. You're going to face a lot of rejection. There'll be weeks where it just sucks and you're just eating losses. But if you're persistent, eventually you're going to hit some momentum where it feels like you cannot stop winning. And it is true. So be persistent and don't give up. So that's it. That's the presentation. Any questions?
This was amazing. You're amazing, Joe. I think okay, so we do actually have some questions. I'm going to pass it over. And then, if everyone who has a question for Joe can use the same function as Daniel did, the hand raise function, then we can probably get through them pretty reasonably. Daniel, go for it.
Thank you. Joe, in terms of some software that you might be using for your cold emailing, just help automate some of the processes that you mentioned, or anything you're using for LinkedIn content, for cold emailing, just kind of the best softwares you're using to kind of help your life and make your life easier during this process, because it is so, tedious.
Yeah, so there's a couple. I talked to a company today. I have to get their name. They're pretty good for early stage startup companies. And then there's Apollo, which is pretty useful. Apollo.ai. That one's good. It's the best value because it has a lead database and then a sales engagement platform. So you can filter by the contacts that you want and then push them into email campaigns and A/B test everything.
Okay, so Apollo.ai, and then the first one I didn't catch.
I can't remember the name. I had a demo with them this morning. It's Buzz something. I'll get it. I could get it after.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Joe.
Any other questions from the group? Looks like everyone's good. Oh man, I just had a question and I can't remember it now, and it was so practical too. Darn. Whatever.
Just
I'll-
one, if I can make one comment, and this is specifically for our VSG teams. You know, I've been a VC for a few decades at this point, and I think you just heard the most valuable hour that you could have had. So I really, really hope that you all paid attention to this, take notes, watch the recording. It can seriously make your companies. So thank you so much, Joe. I can't tell you how much I appreciated this.
Of course, thanks for having me. And if anyone wants to get in contact, feel free to add me on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter. I'm putting out sales tips now every day on Twitter. If you want that in your life, please follow me.
I remembered my question, but now it seems so stupid to ask after Dave's really nice.
No, there's
It was essentially just asking whether or not Zooms are now synonymous with phone calls. You know, like
that's a
you
great question.
should you replace phone calls with Zoom now?
Yes. So there's a study by Gong that shows that conversion rates on Zoom calls are higher than phone calls. And the reason for that is there's a lot of nonverbal communication that a great sales tip. So I should add that to the deck. So there's a lot of nonverbal communication that comes through on video that you don't see on, you can't see on a phone call. And the other thing that's good is people have to be more engaged. So I can tell you when I take a demo with a company and it's a phone call or it's a Zoom and I keep my camera off, I'm checking my email, I'm doing some other stuff. But if it's a Zoom call and you're both on it, you're probably going to see a slightly higher conversion rate. So I'm adding that to my deck. Excellent, excellent question.
Well, you're welcome. Do you have any, you know, like, I know your last slide was kind of like your parting words, but like, what, like, if anything you can, oh no, look, we have another question. See if we lag long enough. Well, let's make this the last question because we're definitely over for time.
I'm fine. If you have time, I'm fine.
Oh, great. Dominic, go for it.
Hi, yeah. Question for you. So in my company, we're raising money and we're selling to customers. How does this process change for trying to get investment versus trying to get sales? Is it really all the same?
So I don't think I should speak to the fundraising side of things. That's probably not my area of expertise. All I can say is based on founders that I've worked with, and this is from VCs that I've talked to. So maybe I'm kind of wading into an area that I'm not supposed to be giving advice on. But it's always like, if you have really good traction and you've built a really good company, VCs will invest in you. So it's hard to balance building, raising, and sales. But you have to kind of understand your marketing. Can you do it without sales? I think that what I just said is kind of just like a ramble that's not that credible. There's probably someone else on this call who just spoke who can probably
more process wise, right? Like with the demos and the intro calls and the follow-ups, more about that stuff, if you think it all still applies.
Can you elaborate on that?
So like when we're meeting investors, we do a pitch, right? And there's some sort of negotiation, some sort of closing process, and there's leads, and we're treating it fairly similar to how we're treating the sales pipeline. And I'm just wondering if that's a good approach or a bad approach.
So I think it's a good approach. I had a call yesterday with a founder who raised, a non-technical founder who raised $5 million off a deck. And he said what he did was he made a list of all the VCs who invest in the space. He started kind of with like the lower quality VCs with his pitch, and he documented everything. And then his pitch was just like you would in a sales presentation or with these demos and with your product. He took an iterative approach. So you have to actively listen and understand what the feedback is. And then as you talk to more VCs and you kind of move up the VC ladder, then you can kind of figure out what the messaging is, and kind of you have your funnel of VCs. You have your tier 1 VCs and maybe your tier 2 VCs, but you start with your tier 2 on something like this. But yeah, it's definitely kind of the same thing where you have your process.
Right. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Any more questions? So, I mean, like I was going to say, usually I like to ask for some parting advice, but you kind of like sprinkled in a bunch of parting advice throughout all of your deck, by telling people to essentially, you take the L's, because the winds will come, you know, and to not give up, you know, exactly where to put their energy and attention. But is there anything that you can say, maybe just from your personal experiences in sales, that would be really helpful or relevant to an early stage technology startup, maybe on a personal note?
Yeah, I think you have to realize like the effort that you put in on the sales front is the effort that you get back. And a lot of what you do today shows up like 60, 90, 120 days out. So you really have to not procrastinate, because you put it off for, you know, sales for like 2 or 4 weeks, and then suddenly you're not closing anything over the next month or so. The other thing is like, it can be really tough to accept, especially people who are like high achievers. They come from like a very pedigree background where they've always succeeded. Like the market doesn't care about you at all. So if you're getting rejections and you can't solve your issues, and you've talked to someone who can help you with sales and they have sales expertise and they reviewed your calls, you might have to pivot. So I've worked with founders who know what they're doing from a product standpoint, but they made assumptions about things. They didn't talk to customers. They didn't listen to the market. And then they wasted like 2.5, 3 years of their life on something. So really listen to the market. Try not to be too emotionally attached to your product. You know, that's probably easier said than done. And then the other thing is like, you're going to get fed rejection, which is fine. You just have to keep at it, because every single company is trying to sell their product too. And yeah, I mean, you will get better at it. That's the other thing. Like, sales is not hard. You just have to get up to that 101 level, and then you'll be good to go. But it's not hard. You just have to. I never had any sales training. I figured everything out on my own. So you can figure it out if I can do that.
I feel like your share touched a few people that I know from the garage, very near and dear to me, right down to the core. So I think, thank you so much. I just have to say, like, you are a very, very useful resource for the garage. I'm so grateful that you spent some time with us, and hopefully maybe make some good connections out of this presentation. And maybe we can snag you again in like maybe in 6 months, 7 months or so, come back and do this again for our new teams when we do our spring recruiting.
Yeah, I'd love to. No, all good. Yeah, thanks for having me. And if anyone ever wants to chat, always down to chat and learn a little bit more about your company, so I can tailor my advice, or probably some assumptions I made today on some people's companies, which that's another sales tip. Don't make assumptions, always ask questions. So,
and just for anyone else who's still on the call, we do have another Oceanside chat. Next week's Wednesday, we have our VC Angel office hours, but the following week, next Wednesday, we have Dalton Wright coming in from the VC world. So some of the things that Joe is a little bit more hesitant to weigh in on, Dalton will definitely be able to. And so hopefully I'll see you guys all there. You'll get that link to RSVP for that event in the wrap-up email that I'll send with the video. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it. Very helpful.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.